The striped square Afghan is an original design created by my good friend and longtime machine knitter, Ronnie Soltysiak. She asked me to demonstrate and write up the pattern. To get the written pattern, follow the link and the instructions in the description below. And while you're there, click the subscribe button and ring the bell if you'd like to see future videos like this. This tutorial is presented in 3 parts. In part 1, you will learn to make panel A, which includes the basic stitch pattern, shaping techniques, tips on changing colors, and the border. The machine is an LK150 using a number 4 worsted weight yarn. The stitch size is set to 8 and a 1 click, and we'll start with the carriage on the left. But before I do that, I'm going to set the left Russell lever to knit, which is in position 2, and then I will set the right Russell lever to hold on the right side. With my yarn, I'm going to form a slip knot, and I'm going to pull out the first needle to the right of 0. And I'm going to also, before I put it on there, I'm going to put a little stitch holder on it. And I'm going to make that kind of loose. And I'm going to hold it to the bottom. Then I'm going to pull out the next needle to the right. And I'm going to E-wrap it by going under and over the needle. That's a counterclockwise position. Then I'm going to return to the center or the middle or the first needle, and I'm going to manually knit it off. Okay, now I'm pulling up the left needle, and I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to E-wrap it, this time under and over clockwise. And then I am going to put a little weight on this. Okay, and I'm going to pull out one more needle to the left, making sure that my yarn is under it. So I can thread my machine at this point, my carriage. Okay, now if you notice, I have this one in hold. Using that as the guide, I'm going to do every other needle out, but it only happens to be this one other needle. Now, because my Russell lever on the right hand side is in hold position, these 2 needles in hold won't knit. These in upper working position will knit. And I'm going to make one pass to the right. Okay, it did exactly what I expected. And because the yarn was under this end needle, it actually wrapped over it. So, now, when I'm knitting back, all the needles will knit. But on this side, I'm going to be bringing one needle forward to hold position, but it doesn't really matter. It can be in upper work or in work position. It's going to knit this particular piece of yarn. But it's just easier and quicker to just bring it all out. I'm going to knit one to the left. Okay, now I'm going to bring up another needle on the left over the strand of yarn, and using my every other needle selector, and that is the guide, I'm going to bring every other needle into hold position. On this one, I'm going to bring the next needle out into hold and knit them all across. Back to this one, one out, making sure it's over the yarn down here. Then every other needle, one, and we're going to keep going like this until I get to my row 10. That's 9 and 10. This is where I work 4 short rows. Okay, the only thing you have to remember about these 4 short rows are the end 3 needles. Everything else is pretty standard at this point. Okay, so when we, on the first short row, we're bringing 1 and 1 out to hold position. The other 2 of the 3 end needles are going to be in work position. And then we're simply going to bring out every other needle of the remaining needles into hold position. Okay? So we're going to knit 1 row. Short row 1 is completed. Now we're going to knit short row 2. And oddly enough, we're going to bring 2 of the end needles out to hold position. That was pretty easy. But we also are changing our left lever. The right lever was still on hold going this way, but this time the left one is going to be on hold. But we also have to push anything in the center of the 3 end needles are going back into upper work position. And we're going to come across. Okay. Now we're on the 3rd row of short rows. This one's pretty easy. All 3 of the end 3 needles are in hold position, and every other needle in the middle is in hold position. Now, on the 4th and final row, this is where it gets interesting. On the left, the first needle will be in hold position, and the next 2 are going to upper work position. On the right, it's just the opposite. The first 2 needles coming from this direction will stay in hold, and the 3rd will go into upper working position. And we are going to wrap around that middle needle here of the 3 end needles. The middle one is wrapped. That's so we don't create a hole. All the other needles in the middle will go into upper working position, and we are going to knit across. And that's exactly what we wanted to see. Okay, first thing you're going to do is put your left Russell carriage into knit position, and we are going to bring up our outer stitch over the yarn at the bottom. See how that's going over it? Okay, this one is going back into upper work position, and then we're going to move every other needle to hold position, and I just did that wrong. So these should be worked. So let's work through that. I didn't use this as my guideline like I said I should. These are the ones that should be in hold. So I'm going to bring those into hold, and the ones that should be work, I'm just going to move back to upper work position. This one actually needs to be in upper work position too, because we need those stitches to knit off. Exception. We just bring one up over the yarn down here and knit across, because all of these are going to be knit off on this row. Row 30 is my next short row, and row 41 is my color change. So I'm going to keep continuing this fashion until I get to row 30. So now we're going to begin in the short row when we see more stitches on the needle other than those narrow number. Okay, you're always remembering the end 3. So On the first short row, first make sure you put your both Russell levers into hold position. And on the end needles, you're going to pull those out. First row, the first end needle goes out to hold position. First short row, first needle goes out to hold position on both sides. Then you leave 2 into work on each side, and starting with that next one, you bring every other one. And it works out perfectly when you're using your little tool, your little needle pusher. Okay, so now we're going to knit across. On row 2, we're going to put the second needle on both sides into hold position. Row 2, second needle. And then everything in between gets pushed to upper working position. Okay? Now we'll do row 2. On row 3 of the short rows, the third needle on each end goes into hold position. And every other needle in between goes into hold because the carriage is on the left. On row 4, we start row 4 by first wrapping the second needle on this end. And then we are going to push, remember, let's start from the left. 1 needle is going to be in hold on this row, and 2 are going to be in upper work position. Okay? Now because we're going this way, we're wanting all the center ones to knit. 1 on the right is going to be in hold position, or actually 2 on the right are going to be in hold position, and 1, and then everything in between. So all you have to remember are what you're doing with the last 3 edge stitches. So everything else in between is going into work position or upper work position. Okay? Now we're going to knit 1 more row across, and we got exactly what we wanted. Everything in the middle got knitted, and 2 on this side are in hold position and 1 on this side. Before you move on, make sure you change your Russell carriage back to knit on the left hand side, because we're going into regular mode now. Now this is the one we're going to pull up the next needle. Now it happened to go, I don't know if you can see that. Here, that's better. On this side, I'm going to pull up this needle. Now, because it was in hold on this one, it may be, you want to make sure that the yarn is under the new needle so it forms a new stitch on the next row. This one returns to upper work position because you want it to work, and this one goes into upper work position. Using this new stitch as a guide, all of these will go into hold position. There you have it. Nice arrangement, huh? All right. And now we just pull up a stitch on this side and continue along our way. Once again, pull up the stitch, making sure the yarn is under it. Now I think we're getting to a point, and I'm going to change my color soon. I'm going to change on row 40, and we're on 38 right now. I'm going to pull up my needle, and use my guide to pull up every other needle. And every time This outer needle, the last needle on the right, will always be knit. So you want to pay attention, and that's how you know that you got it right. Okay, we're on row 40. So, time to change our yarn, except I am not going to change on row 40, I'm going to change on row 41. And here's the reason. Remember when we go this way, we're holding every other needle. So, I want to be able to bury my yarn in neatly, weave it in as I go. Otherwise, we're going to have all these yarn ends because this Afghan is designed to use up scrap yarns. So we're going to do one more row and get over to the right. Pull up my needle. Now I'm going to cut my yarn. We've just cut our yarn and we are going to weave in our end. But before we can do that, we're going to move some of these into hold position. Now, because this is set for knit, they're actually going to knit. So we can just weave up and down along this. This is the old yarn that I'm weaving in. Okay, tuck it up nice and tight, and that'll get knit off on the next row. In the meantime, I have my new yarn ready to go. And so I'm just going to hold it down here and knit across the row. So what we've accomplished was the old yarn was woven in. And we can just let that dangle for a minute. Now, we're on the left-hand side, so we are going to pull up another needle, a new needle. Use that as the guide and pull up every other needle. Remember, the last one is still a knit stitch. Okay, now we're on to our new color. So we changed on row 41. So now we're going to do row 42. And once again, when we go back this way, we're going to bring up a needle. So we're set up for adding our extra needle, but we're going to move these into hold position so it's easier to weave up and down across them. And so we're going to just weave this end in. So when we're all said and done, there isn't going to be any loose ends. There won't be any loose ends. They'll all be woven in. We'll just tag this one to this, put a little tension on it. There you go. Now we've already pulled up our extra needle on this end, and we wrapped it over it, so it'll double wrap it on this one. Okay, and so we're going to just knit across. All right, so we made a clean change, and then when you're done, you can just take your little clothespins off if you'd like, and you can trim them now if you'd like to, or you can just trim them when you're all finished. I just brought my stitch into work, and then normally I would pull up every other needle all the way across the board. But on this particular row, because it's the very last row, I don't want to tuck the stitches. I want them just to knit off. So I don't have to do this on the very, very last row when I bring up my last stitch. All I want to do is flip my Russell lever so that it'll knit into the knit position and then work one row across. We're about to begin the edging. So, what we're going to do is, I have all my needles in work right now because I just finished my last row. I have the tension set on my carriage the same, I'm making sure that both my Russell levers are in hold position, and I am going to move all the needles to hold position except the last three on the right, because I'm going to be working from right to left. Okay, so my Russell levers are in hold, and I am going to knit 6 rows. Now we're going to move 3 more needles into upper work position and knit 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's kind of tricky because we're right on the end and we're in a full bed. Okay, now we're going to take our transfer tool and lift them up and just put them on top of the 3 stitches that are the second set of 3 stitches. Kind of awkward because I'm right on the end of the machine and I'm trying not to get in front of the camera. Okay, so we have 3 stitches in work. Now I'm going to move those up to hold and then back to upper work because I want to get the stitches behind the latch just so that I make sure they knit off. In the meantime, I'm going to put 3 more stitches into upper work position, so I'm working across a total of 6. I'm going to do 4 more rows. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then I return to the first 3 on the far right and lift them up on top of these needles. Okay, I've just transferred my 3 on top of my second set, and I'm moving these back into upper work position, and then I'm moving the next 3 into upper work position and knitting 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going back to my 3 end stitches on the right and picking them up and moving them over. There we go. So I'm going to move those past the latch, the stitches past the latch, and then I'm going to move those into upper work position and the next set into upper work position. Here we go. One, two, three, 4. Okay, so we have just knit our 4 rows on the last 6 stitches. So my final transfer will be down to 3 stitches. And bring them out so that they're in upper work. And now we're going to knit 6 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're going to just take them off the machine just so it's easier to deal with. But you can just slip them right on to a stitch holder. And we'll use that later. We just want to hold them so they don't run. Which looks like. Isn't that sweet? And we have this little tail, and that will help us when we join it.
Now let's take a look at panel A. It is a triangle with a completely finished border. I've noted the row numbers where I've changed colors and where I've started my short rows. So I am ready to make a second panel A just like it. Keep this information handy as you will refer to it as you work through the rest of the Afghan in part 2. I hope you are enjoying this project. Please take a moment to subscribe and ring the bell for notification of future videos. Part 2 builds on Part 1. You will learn how to knit panel B, which joins the panels together as you go. When you take the Afghan off the machine, you are practically done.
Happy machine knitting!